welcome to the very first ever late night recording of Deep Thoughts. I've been wanting to do one of these for a while, so I'm going to trick this thing out with a massive amount of plugins, and so if it looks absolutely crazy, there's a very intentional thing. So, I've been trying to figure out a subject to talk about really late at night that might be sort of spooky and fun, right? Not that you're going to watch this at the exact time I made it, of course. So I thought about doing like one on ghosts. And I thought, well, shit, I've done so many ghost stories that, I only have a few stories of my own. I could sit and theorize about ghosts. And then I thought, well, what about the subject of demons? I've been doing a lot of research into this CERN project, the LHC. And there's a lot of talk about demons. And I thought, well, okay, I probably got about half an hour about both concepts. So let's do ghosts and demons. How about that? Sort of these unseen entities of consciousness that a very small yet significant proportion of society is worried about. Now, I want to tell you right now, I have never in my life seen anything that's like a traditional ghost, meaning it's dark outside and some apparition of some sort moves in front of me. To my knowledge, I've never seen anything like that in my life. And believe me, at times in my youth, I have definitely beckoned such a thing to occur. It's completely in fun, Never seen it. And I know that there obviously have been people who have passed away, and before they did, they told their loved ones, hey man, if there's any way I can come back and prove to you that there's an afterlife, I'll do it. Houdini being one of them. And his wife passed away saying, nope, never saw anything. But I have had my weird experiences, with, there's really two that are sort of ghostly in my particular past, One is that my grandmother passed away, and then, that morning, or about noon or so, I got this feeling of her over my bed, and she said, I just want you to know I'm on the other side, and I'm okay. That was it. And then my mother called me about 2 o'clock, 2 hours later, and I got confirmation that she had passed away. Now, someone might think, well, you knew she was sick, and so you're just having these visions. Okay, so let's split the hair of that little dismissive observation, because what I find is that people feel like they're so profound in their skepticism, but they don't really take a moment to take it one step further in their skepticism. Okay. All right. So you have me forgetting that my grandmother's really in hospice. I didn't really realize. I actually called my mom about a week ago and asked her. I said, how old was Grandma when she died? And how did she die? And what was the circumstances? Because I never knew. I had heard she was not doing well, but I never knew she was not doing well to a situation where she was permanently in a hospital bed. I heard that she had been in and out of hospital beds, but I really didn't know where she was physically. And so I wasn't worrying about her at all, right? One of my uncles is a plastic surgeon, was taking care of all of her hospital regiments. He found her completely over-medicated, like they were trying to kill her, and he erased about 2/3 of it and reassigned the other third and said this is what she needs to be on. And if you ever do that again, I'll have this hospital closed, right? One of my other aunts, one of her daughters is a hospital administrator. We've got juice in the medical industry, right? But this, the skepticism might go something like this. If one is to say, oh, you were thinking about your grandmother, which is why you had this vision, then I would guess that one would have that vision constantly. You're having it every morning. It's like the guy who wakes up 365 days out of the year predicting an earthquake. Well, guess what? One day he's going to be fucking Nostradamus to most people who aren't paying attention to the fact he does it every single day, right? Sorry, I got this hood on. It's about 57 degrees out. Not too bad. So I never woke up before or after that moment and predicted such a thing. Never would have thought such a thing And when it happened, I wasn't like, oh, she's really dead, you know. I didn't really come to grips with the fact that that meant I died. It's just this weird thing. Okay. So there's no predictions ahead of time. No other occurrences of this sort of thing. My other really super vivid one is the Walt Disney experience, which I have told so many times on the show that you would only be interested if it was your very first time hearing this, which would be I'm at Disneyland here in Anaheim, and I go around the corner. My girlfriend's got to go to the bathroom, so waiting for her to go to the bathroom, and up walks to me an apparition of Walt Disney. And I had met one of his Imagineers about a week earlier, and his name is Bob Gurr, Gurr, very famous guy, still alive. He was hired in 1954 to document the creation of Disneyland, and he also participated in engineering a lot of the propulsion systems for the submarine ride and Pirates of the Caribbean and a few other places, right? But water was his big specialty. So I'm waiting for girlfriend to get done and go in the restroom. And up walks Walt and says, oh, by the way, Bob Gurr's over there. You should go say hi to him. And in my mind, he dropped a little map pin, which showed me where Bob was, which is over in Tomorrowland. Now, I can't describe this enough, but the reason why we were going real late at night, well, it was probably 5 or 6 o'clock. Actually, no, it was daylight and it was in December. And so December has very short days, so it had to be somewhere around 3 to 4 o'clock. But the whole idea is that we had season passes and we were going to eat dinners, 2007. And I only hope that somewhere they have the surveillance footage, because what I'm saying is recorded if they have surveillance footage going back 10 years. But I'm standing by the bank on the right side of the entry. And he does this. He walks up to me, he points, and he drops his pin in my brain. And we're supposed to go to this Mexican restaurant in Frontierland. So we're both starving. And she comes out of the restroom. We start walking down Main Street. And I said, let's go over here first. And she says, okay. It may have been afternoon. Hell if I know. I can't remember what time it was. And there's only 2 rides on that side of the park we ride. One is Star Tours, and the other one's Space Mountain. Walk right by both of them. In fact, I never even came close to Space Mountain. And she's still walking behind me. Couldn't figure it out to this day. She vividly remembers this, and this was the trigger point in her personal life where she started to contemplate the fact that spirits do exist. Because up to that point, she was very agnostic, but definitely leaning towards a more atheist. There is nothing after this life, and Marcus crazy forever. Getting into this cartoony world of ghosts or whatever. Not really ghosts, but a belief in a symbiotic human soul relationship. And she's walking behind me, and right up there is Bob Gurr. Walked right to the guy. He was at his submarine ride, which had been retrofitted to be Finding Nemo. Excuse me. The ride was broken. Okay, and he was stuck in line. I said, hey Bob, what's up? And he has this buddy who I also met at this party. I met him at Christmas Day. Because I spent New Year's in New York City that particular year, I knew it must have been like Christmas Day I met him, and it was either right after New Year's or right before New Year's. I wish I knew, but it was Imagineering Day. That's the day you can find it. So 2007, December, Imagineering Day on some calendar of Disney, you'll find that date, or it must have been right inside the cusp of January. But for whatever reason, it was a nice day. I went up and said hi to him. He said he was mountain biking that day. He was 75 years old at the time, and I was like, dude, you're working harder than me, and you're 75. So he had just met me, and we'd had a great conversation about Walt, and I said, well, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I did this submarine ride, a long time ago, and now they've retrofitted it to be Finding Nemo, and so I'm just waiting to take the maiden voyage on Imagineering Day. And the whole line back there, which is to his right, they're all Imagineers. And he goes, all day today, if you see this little lapel on there, I forgot what it was, but he goes, those are Imagineers. I was like, oh, cool. And right as we got done with our conversation, a cast member comes down, which is what they call workers, and they said, we're ready for you, Mr. Gurr. And so he got on the ride and left. And that was it. We went and ate and did our 3 rides and went home. And when I started telling my girlfriend what was going on that day, she had a completely different perception of everything. And it took me another 5 years to really get her over the hump that there is something else to reality, and that you do see evidence of it all the time. It's just that you're so indoctrinated away from it. And, the crazy part is that we have, what's crazy about this whole thing is that we tend to have, in my opinion, right, this feeling of satiating intelligence immediately supplanted for the otherwise unknown and very skeptical, And what does that mean? That means that you look at people being foolish and impressionable, and you know that they're being foolish and impressionable, and your feeling is of relief. It's a sense of relief that you're not being indoctrinated. Like a lot of the witch doctors that do medicine in South America, where they do these fake surgeries where they lay someone down on their back and then they bring all these, animal guts with them, and they do this sort of sleight of hand thing where they look like they're reaching into someone's belly. And they use, the innards of animals, claiming that they're the innards of the humans. And they're pulling out demonic charged, cancers or whatever. And there's a Skeptic Society guy who goes around and busts these guys because they charge a lot of money for it. And then in some cases, a lot of people die from thinking that they're cured. But the odd thing is that some people feel like they're cured. And that feeling of feeling like they're cured makes them cured. And so it's a fine line, right? It's a super fine line between being cured and feeling like you're cured, and using that biofeedback loop of positivity to actually create an immune system that can't be defeated. But let's think about this idea of ghosts, because I'm just going to come at it from a standpoint that I haven't really seen them, other than those two occasions, which I would love for someone to explain away the Walt situation and with a bag of chemicals. It was very, very specific the way he looked and behaved. He was only there for literally a split second. It was like me walking up to you and going, "Hey, by the way, Bob Gurr's over there. You should go say hi to him." Whew. It was about that fast. And of course he was there, and I just walked straight to him, people. Disneyland's a big freaking place, just so you know. To walk directly to the guy and not to any other false destination. I never walked to a place and said, "Oh, well, he's not here, let's keep walking there. He's not here, let's walk there." I just walked straight to him. And I walked to, the submarine ride is a kiddie ride, and Finding Nemo is doubly kiddie ride. And it's the last thing on earth I want to ride, I actually ended up riding it with my daughter, and it was actually kind of cute. Bunch of HD TVs buried in the water, very strategically buried such that you couldn't see that they were TVs, that they looked like they were actually fish swimming down there, cartoon fish and stuff. It's very creative. Hats off to the folks who resurrected that ride, because the submarine one, it kind of run its course. But what would ghosts be? Traditional ghost stories really talk about the fact that they are spirits that simply either don't want to move on to the next realm or can't move on to the next realm. Native Americans have a very interesting definition, which is that the more that you become full of hate, you're not ready for the next realm. And so you must sit here until you chill the F out, and then you can go. I think that one sounds pretty cool. But as you know, on this show, I consistently discuss the spirit realm as a real place. And, it really doesn't liken itself to any religious paradigm that I've ever been educated about. And on any level, even Eastern religions that really do, I think, a more beautiful job than, say, other religions of the first world. But I've had these weird experiences in my life where I've been hugely inspired out of thin air. And it gets to more of like you thought this up, and therefore you just brought it from your subconscious to your conscious, and these things happen. But I've written music, I've written poetry in the middle of the night. One of the things I experienced was I was dating a girl whose father passed away. And the weird thing was that the way I found out her father passed away was really, really rough. Okay, just met this girl, and we just got along great, and we're having this conversation, and I was talking about, I don't know why on earth we got in this conversation so early, because I was definitely not awake and definitely not pursuing anything remotely agenda-based like we are with this show at all. I was a normal dude in my 20s. And somehow I got in this conversation about AIDS. And I started talking about statistics of AIDS that I had just read online, or read somewhere. Probably wasn't even online. It's like 1997-ish. And she starts arguing with me and getting more and more charged up and more angry with me. And I just met this girl, and we're like in that euphoric kind of infatuation stage for each other. Well, she starts sobbing all of a sudden. And I am now completely confused what's going on here. And I approached her and I was like, what's going on here? You know? And she said, well, my father died of AIDS. And he died because he got into drugs. And he caught it from hypodermic needles. And he died in a hospital in Florida. He was a Cuban. And she had no idea he was dying. And by the time she heard that her father passed away, which was obviously all hidden from her, and he was too young to die by a mile, she lost her dad. And it killed her. And so here I am spouting off all this stuff about AIDS. And it doesn't even matter if I was right or wrong. It was just the wrong subject matter for her because it was still very fresh in her. I don't know how many years away from his death from this moment there was. I don't know if it was 5 years, 2 years, 1 day. I don't know. So her and I patched that situation up. Never argued again as far as I remember. And I was really into writing poetry at the time. And which is something I recommend for everybody. Go through at least a 3 to 5 year jaunt in your life where you try to write poetry. And what ends up happening is you write some horrendous crap for at least the first year, unless you're super gifted, or just gifted, more than I was. And then it starts to get better. It starts to really get better. And what you end up doing is really commanding the English language, or whatever language you speak, which is well worth it. But I woke up one night, because I used to keep my books next to me. I have these computational notebooks, which I recommend for everyone. They're these grid paper notebooks, and they last forever. I've got them, and they're 20 years old. And they're meant to be lab notebooks. Grids are great because you can always draw a box if you need to. If you're doing interface design or any type of illustration, the boxes really help you keep proportions. If you're doing storyboards for an animation, Jared, you can use those to really line up everything you're doing. But I'd wake up and I'd write in these things, my poetry. And I remember being asleep, and I woke up. It's pitch black in my room, and I grabbed my pen, and I just started writing. And it was really, really odd. I woke up the next day, and the poem was about my girlfriend and I having a baby boy together, when she ended up having a boy with somebody else. It was called Junior, and he was called Junior, and the father was called Junior. And the whole thing was that her father's soul was going to inhabit our boy, and that's what the poem was all about. And the odd thing is, for myself, I wasn't sitting there dreaming up every verse, and I remember writing it very fluently in the middle of the night. Almost as I didn't feel possessed at all. I just felt like I just need to write this out, but I couldn't see what I was doing. It was all in the dark, and I finished. I went to bed. It was almost like a dream, except the poem was there on the paper the next day. And I don't think it's a very good poem. I don't remember. I got to reread it. I used to publish the stuff online before social media. Make sure I was embarrassed as soon as the internet was created. But I thought that was really interesting, you know. I used to, I have a story where I went to my music studio. I used to do music in the 90s. And I went to the studio, and it's always on, always powered up, and I tried to write some music, and it just didn't work out at all. And so I went and laid out in the sun, 30 minutes up, 30 minutes down. Sweaty, it was gross. Time to go take a shower. It's middle of a summer afternoon in the Bay Area. And I walked by my studio, my room, and I'm like, crap. Really wish I could write something, because I feel like I want to, but I had nothing. So it's like when you're an artist, you go to that white piece of paper and you're like, man, I got nothing. And so I sit down And I got nothing. I just was at that almost depressing blankness, right? And all of a sudden, I get this like almost like a wave of energy that took over my body, and my hands go up to the keyboard, and I've got 2 chords popping out, and I'm singing lyrics I've never heard in my life, and it was essentially this really cool love song called "Individual." And I wrote it. I hit record on my digital recorder, played it. Hit record on my sequencer, played it, sang the vocals, stopped it. I spent probably, 45 minutes locking down the first version of the song, went, took a shower, came back, recorded 3 versions of the song. And one's kind of a clubby version, one's the original, one's like a ballad version. And I mixed it down to a tape, took it to my girlfriend 30 minutes away, dropped it on her doorstep, and left just as a nice little gift. Absolutely bizarre. Again, the song's not some, major British pop tune or anything, but I was singing also, and it was like a sort of, the way British people sing in sort of an English ambiguous accent, right? So there was no accent, but it wasn't quite an American accent, wasn't quite a British accent. Sort of weird thing. But it was very complex, And when you have those experiences, you start to wonder, okay, how the hell we put together here, From the Walt Disney thing, which I can't explain through a bag of chemicals, to maybe this recessive songwriting capability I had where I wanted to write, maybe my subconscious is like, let me just write something here. I'll send it to the consciousness once you need it. But every experiment we've ever done with the subconscious, it's not very mature. And I don't know if it has the capability of doing something intellectual like writing a song. It tends to be the frightened child that believes everything it's told, Who knows? I have many people in my life that I believe to be very credible individuals who have, and Kyle's one of them, and his woman, where they walk into these homes and they simply feel it. They feel the presence of individuals in these homes. And, sometimes they feed the reaction to say, look, I felt this, and someone else goes, well, let me see if I feel it, and they go up and they feel it in the same spot. At that point, you kind of write it off like the warm reading of a gypsy, which is that they'll ask you a bunch of questions about yourself and then sort of feed it back to you in a reflection session, and you feel like, oh my God, they totally knew everything about me, and you're like, well, yeah, you just told them everything about you. All they did was add some logical digressions from what you already told them. A cold reading is much, much better, right? Used to be this guy on TV, John Edwards, who had his psychic reading show where he did this kind of town hall format. And I've had friends that went to their recording and they said, man, the guy records for hours and hours and hours, and they just cherry pick what ends up occurring. And a lot of people poo-poo his readings because of the long length of his sessions and the fact that, reality TV show is so scripted, it's insane. But sometimes I think about these people, and this is just full skepticism, that these individuals have had at least a couple, if not several dozen, genuine experiences communicating with the other side, simply because they have an open mind to do so. And they, at that point, want to recapture that capability. And so they get involved, and they, who knows, maybe they mix fake techniques with real techniques. Maybe with this John Edwards guy, he's truly trying to do it, but he's failing most of the time. And so every once in a while he gets a couple good ones out of, 12 hours of recording, he gets enough to do one show. I have no idea what the regimen was. The thing that's cool about John's show is I've seen a couple of the readings where the one that struck me the most, if you've ever seen this, is that there was he tends to start throwing out what he's feeling, and he wants people to attach to his story. But he had this sort of New York Bambino kind of guy in the audience, and I don't mean that to slight him whatsoever. It's actually a good thing for the story. And he wasn't going to give up anything. This dude came to the show, and he's like, this guy's a fraud. I'm only here because my wife wants to see the guy, and hey, it's kind of cool to be an audience filming a show, right? And John starts focusing on the guy that ignores the wife completely. And they really start filming this guy pretty close. And he starts talking about a boy, a young child that passed away in the family, and how traumatic that was, and how he had a gigantic funeral for the kid and how close he was with his grandfather and stuff like that. And this dude can barely hang on to his emotions in this audience. And he was ice cold, man. He wasn't giving John anything besides, obviously there's some facial feedback and that kind of stuff that maybe John's hitting a chord, but John could have easily, said the wrong thing and it wouldn't have matched. But a very specific thing saying this child died and the neighborhood had this massive funeral and it was a sudden death and yada yada. Well, they interviewed that guy after the show, I remember, and he recounted the whole thing. He said, look, I only came to this thing because of my wife. I think this guy's a fraud when I first walked in the door. And I feel like he got the kid's name right or something like that. It just went really nutso accurate around this one particular reading. But this dude is trying not to cry because he's a stand-up guy, man. He's not the kind of guy that cries, right? Who knows what he does? He could have been a plumber for all I know, but he could have been a Bambino, mafia guy for all I know too, because he had that quality to his personality, right? He was a tough guy for real, and all he did was he's chewing on some candy or something, I think, just trying to satiate his responses. And he finally said, he goes, "This guy's for real." He goes, "I'm just telling you right now, this dude's for real." And it utterly shattered that dude's perception of the entire planet when John was able to connect about this kid. I think there's one other one I think I should mention too, was there was John was talking about he had essentially isolated a kid in the front row, and he said he figured out that the kid had found his mother, I believe, dead. He said he just said, I feel like, your mother's here. And he goes, I feel like she passed away. And the kid starts sobbing. And the kid, I think he did nod, yeah, you're right. But I mean, like, how crazy is that? Of course, 12 hours of editing, you could say somebody's mother died. Someone in the room's mother died, right? This is a really young kid, probably a teenager. And he looked at the kid and he goes, "You found her, didn't you?" Because that was very hard for you, wasn't it? And the kid's just sobbing, dude. He's reliving the whole experience. And, of course, John's telling him, your mother wants you to know she's okay, and she's never been without you. And the little boy one, he said, he's with his other relatives that passed on. He named these other relatives or, what position in the family they were. Again, you could say if a certain person's a certain age, he's with your mother, and this guy's, 65 years old in the audience. Well, there's a 50-50 chance his mom's alive or not, right? I don't know if John ever had any exposure or any situations where he was caught doing that, So, yeah, ghosts, I don't know, man. I don't know why they would be stuck here. I don't know if it's elective. I got the sense that if Walt Disney, didn't give me any other feelings or any other truths when I had that experience. It was just, Bob's over there. You should go say hi. And it was almost like this, for the split second that I saw this sort of mind's eye vision of him, it was in my consciousness, not out there in the park, but it was overlaid on top of the park, almost like I had this Google Glass thing projecting in my eyeballs, When he was in my presence, it felt like almost a free fall of excitement and fear all at the same time of like, oh my God, this is happening, So it wasn't one out of certainty. It wasn't like, well, of course Walt's here and going to tell me where someone is in the park. It wasn't anything like that at all. But now let's talk about demons. I am preparing for you guys a show that's going to be about CERN, the Large Hadron Collider. And, people had said, this thing is... it's being likened to demons being pulled out of, some other plane of existence. And I thought, oh, what a bunch of crap that is, right? And now, what I'm going to say, I'm going to save most of it for the show, of course, but, I've always known that people believe in demons, of course. The more religious you are, of course, it becomes more vivid for you because you have a point of reference. But I will say that the individuals who have financed CERN and put it together are most definitely, without question, believers in this stuff. Whether or not it's real or not, They believe in it. They've invested in it. They've created dances, these ballets dedicated to CERN. It's insane. It's utterly insane how committed they are to this satanic overlay onto CERN. And I thought maybe this show would be a great precursor to the CERN show. I now have so many shows in the queue that I am trying to figure out which ones sort of are paced properly, right? So I'll say this show should follow that show, but I recorded that show a long time ago. I recorded the show recently, right? So I've been pushing them out of order to really ebb the flow of like an album of songs, the tension and release of the subject matter. Because I think that both of us, you guys and myself, we share this fascination with science and things that are more kind of coast-to-coast AM topics. And I've really not jumped into it, but I love that subject matter. Now, one of the, I'll just digress here for 1 second. The shows take forever to encode. So, like, there's been one uploaded now for 4 hours at YouTube, and I'm just waiting for the damn thing to finish so I can put a thumbnail on it and write a description and publish it to you guys. So I do have these things ready at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon sometimes, but it takes like till 9 o'clock at night for the damn thing to show up on YouTube. So there's a delay simply because YouTube is so overwhelmed by new video uploads that they haven't gotten to my encoding yet, You guys should also know that I think you guys know they encode the low resolution one first. Sometimes also I'll publish the YouTube first and put the podcast out second. Sometimes that's due to me completely forgetting I forgot to mix down the audio for the actual website so the podcast will work. Not intentional. And, like the special report of the Kubrick thing, I never published that on the podcast. I want to have something special for YouTube, because I think it's just a superior way of experiencing this. But I thought it might be an interesting precursor to the CERN episode to really discuss what would the demons of the universe be? Where would they come from? What relative scientific purpose would they have? Because religious or not, Savior or not, God or not, you would need to describe where they live, why they do what they do, and sort of what's their ecosystem, what is their food group of consumption. And it starts getting very symbolic and esoteric very quickly, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we should probably discuss sort of what would create them, what would be them, and that sort of thing. In my CERN research, I have discovered some things I never knew that were being theorized out there. But before we get to the science, because I'm going to go over dark matter and antimatter very quickly, and we're going to get into this in further detail inside CERN. But I don't want to blow the CERN episode before we get there. Just know it's coming. And I will credit the individual who suggested I do CERN as soon as I get the episode ready. I'll have you know I'm learning some 3D software all over again so I can create better animations for some of my other episodes. I'm very excited about the sacred geometry episode that's coming up here because I'm going to show you guys a theory visually that I think makes some pretty good sense. And I need to show it to you visually so you understand what I'm talking about. Because I covered it with Kyle, and I think through words it's super duper hard to follow my line of thought. But it's all going well. I'm just figuring out a few other animation techniques to really make sure the animations make sense, because I need to explain how ether behaves and show you how sacred geometry might defeat ether or actually aid ether. But anyway, demons. So most of you who have studied good and evil in your lifetime, through any type of personal theology or religious research, once you're able to pull out of the standard indoctrination of what it is, you start to realize that evil is a very relative I guess you could call it a force in the universe. What is evil for one man is good for another, and what is good for another is evil for another, right? It goes back and forth. Now, there's definitely a difference between things happening like you want them to happen and things not happening like you want them to happen. And then things that are pure evil. Things that generally most people would think is a bad thing. In mankind, we typically, it's very interesting for mankind because I'll give an example that is sort of tough to even for me to describe to you, because I have my own bias, which is probably very similar to your own. When you talk to a doctor, all right, about the biology of a female, a doctor in a very scientific sense will tell you that the moment that a young girl starts to menstruate, she is signaling to the tribe that she is now capable and ready to have babies. And I can only assume that back in the caveman days, that once that menstruation occurred, whatever initial social barriers existed to keep a child from having sex were all of a sudden dropped, and that child was then pushed into the realm of keeping the tribe populated. Now, I think most of us know that all forms of sex, as soon as it was capable, occur within any tribe of a primitive fashion. And I think this is all long gone for mankind. But, you see monkeys all the time, grown-up monkeys having sex with the baby monkeys. I don't mean baby, but I mean, 1 or 2 years old, as soon as they can grab them and have sex with them. And what's really weird is they tend to help each other out with that process, right? The children monkeys don't run away from the adult monkeys that are having sex with them, because I guess it feels good. I don't know. But we as a social, civilized, quote-unquote, socialized level 1 human beings, we have put in place barriers. And we say that children should not have sex. They're too damn young. And there's some unpleasantries when you especially take a grown adult and you try to fit them inside of a small child. Again, you could just simply say menstruation is the key, where we try to authorize sex with the child and it's still too damn young. Especially when you have like a 45-year-old man. But not very long ago, that was not the standard. If you just read historical records of famous people 150 years ago and beyond, you have 14-year-old girls being married off to 45-year-old men. And yes, some 14-year-old girls are almost indistinguishable between, pre-adolescent and adulthood. Their bodies simply mature really, really fast, and they can handle a grown man. But there are certainly females that blossom much later in life. They don't get their bodies that they need to really handle a grown man. And it's torturous. It's painful. And it's inappropriate. We don't need to have children having painful experiences with adults, and that's why we put these barriers in place. But it is that subject matter that I think that mankind gravitates to when they really need to talk about evil. Because we obviously recognize sex with children now under this very understandable word called pedophilia. And we punish people for doing it nowadays, right? The mascot for Subway Sandwich, the Jared guy, who supposedly lost over 100 pounds eating veggie Subway sandwiches. Don't forget they couldn't find out what 12 inches was, and they also put the glue from shoes into their bread to make it last longer on the shelf. It was really delicious. And they're completely and utterly made out of GMO foods. So there's nothing more vile that you could put in your body than a Subway sandwich, based on those two attributes and their mascot. Now you might say, well, they didn't know their mascot was into all this stuff. And that's probably true. But when Jared went into court and tried to reduce his sentence by testifying to the judge, somehow he got in there and actually told the judge, he goes, look, these girls were 15 and 16 years old. They weren't like they were babies. They weren't 8 years old and 9 years old. Obviously no one's going to cut the guy a blank check. No one's going to reduce his sentence. As a matter of fact, he is showing that even at this late junction in his life, when he's about to be sentenced to prison, when he's probably about to be sodomized beyond his wildest dreams in jail, and believe me, they always get it, he's still as delusional as he was the day he did it. And, if he's so popular and if he's so wealthy from his mascotting of this horrible fast food chain, then he should be able to find people 18 years and up, especially if he's willing to part with money, right? So Kyle and I on the show have said, there's bad things in life that could be viewed as good things for other people, and then then I think there's pure evil. But it is still extremely relative to us. To the demented mind, evil would be good. Now, there are subjects that are very difficult to discuss, and my Satan episode goes into this in a big way. I'm just gonna recall this to put us in perspective. And again, if you're allured to the ghost topic of this episode, you're probably not ready for what's about to hit you from me. But this is a very real situation. And again, go see the Satan episode if you want to see the details on just how deep this rabbit hole goes. And all I ever do in that episode is show you the bottomless pit that is that subject matter, right? But there's a faction of people on earth who are unfortunately at high levels of government, military, police, and royalty that believe in these rituals, which mankind unanimously believes is forbidden, sacrilege, and evil. And it has to do with the sacrificing of human beings. And we've seen this splattered throughout history, and it's usually attached to, again, third world countries, never attached to first world countries, which I think is interesting because we know that all of them have done it. But they take children, and who knows what the ages are of these kids, but they're young. Again, let's not forget the King and Queen of Norway had children in their back real estate that were dug up out of the ground during some excavation to build something or something like that. But they were infant bodies, and they were killed somehow. We don't even know. They're just bones. We don't know what happened to them. But there are people that have been at the darkest depths of this stuff and told on these people. And they said, look, these people sacrifice children. They scare the living crap out of them during these rituals and kill them and drain their bloods into these goblets. And they pass the goblets around the little party they're having, and they drink it. And if you've never heard that before, I understand if you're ready to try to push pause on this or stop or change the video. But it's very, very real. And it's very, very horrid. And it's very, very evil. It's very definitively not what man is on this planet to do, right? The reason why they do drink the blood is that because the blood is full of all kinds of chemicals. There's one chemical, I can't remember the name of it, but I should have it in my Stern episode. But supposedly it's really addictive, and it has obviously the adrenaline of the child in it because they're terrified, and you're drinking that adrenaline from their blood supply into your blood supply. And obviously most of it goes into your digestive system, but some of it bleeds into your mouth cavity, and it's just like me taking a little bit of hit on the cigar. I'm getting nicotine poisoning in my blood supply, which makes me a little high. Luckily, I don't smoke anything with any strength, so I don't get very high at all. But these individuals engage in things I think are unanimously considered evil in the world. So that's mankind behaving in the most evil way that we can imagine besides just simply torturing a human being, right? Demons are never said to be human. Demons require that you believe in the spiritual realm, for one. The consciousness is a separate entity from mortal coil. And that for whatever reason, where they live, they thrive on what is typically categorized as chaos. Now, chaos is a very ambiguous, definition of behavior, right? Most human beings like order in their life up to a very high degree, right? And it's been fabled the demons thrive on the fear of humanity. And let's look at the movie Monsters, Inc. from Pixar. Monsters, Inc. from Pixar its entire plot mechanism is that these monsters from a different realm of existence feed on fear of children. How bizarre is that this movie's made, right? It's when I saw it, it was one of my favorite Pixar movies ever made. But they break through these doors, and they link them up to kids' bedrooms, and they open the door, and they scare the living crap out of these kids, and every time they get the kid to scream in a nightmarish reaction, that fear is then drained into these canisters, which then are used to essentially fuel the world of the monsters. And of course, the story turns in that there's this little brunette girl, which I forget her name, but she's not afraid of these guys anymore. And she comes into their realm and just could give a crap. She's not afraid. Well, she does get afraid every once in a while in there, but the monsters fall in love with her and sort of try to rethink, well, maybe we shouldn't be scaring these kids. But then there's a contest within the show to scare who can scare the kids the most, and you get this sort of reward if you're the monster in the Monsters Inc. Corporation that can do this the most, because you're supplying the most fear canisters to your population of monsters. And that's sort of a cartoony way to see demons. That, supposedly, here's what I find difficult to assess with the theory. These things are into chaos. And they supposedly live in this ecosystem of chaos that they want to bring to us. Which would suggest that their realm in itself is chaotic and would be nearly unmanageable on their end of the fence, right? But supposedly they're able to organize themselves. And according to the CERN theory, they're able to await a stargate, a gateway from their realm to this realm to come and wreak havoc on mankind. And just as a precursor, what they're saying about CERN is that they mention dark matter, which I think is really funny. Dark matter is a big button on Big Bang Theory, because Big Bang Theory is completely full of shit, and they never can come up with enough mass, observable mass in the universe to account for the explosion based on their stupid theory. And so they created dark matter, and all they did was they focused a camera on space, and they just dial up a particular UV spectrum, ultraviolet spectrum, and said, oh, there it is right there. See that big cloud? And that's all the dark matter in the universe. It's just absolutely stupid. It's just stupid times stupid. It's like, as I'm often accused of, conjecture times conjecture, But this idea, again, is that these demons live in this world of utter chaos, and it's always likened to hell, of course, right? And they're always very ugly beings. They're very barnacle-looking kind of sort of the monsters that show up in Blizzard's StarCraft 2, which are brilliantly designed, might I say, and some of them in World of Warcraft, and some of them in Diablo 3, as a matter of fact. But that's a fictional game that's not trying to be real for us, right? It's trying to be entertaining by creating an opposition that we have to beat the entire time. And the entire time you play the game, you're beating those factions. And, of course, the Zerg are what is essentially looks like demonized-looking beings. They're just an insect species. They're not really billed as demons, right? But the dark matter and antimatter. Okay, what's really funny is every time I try to get a clean definition of antimatter from someone in the scientific community, it gets so nebulous and ridiculous that it's like, how do you hang on to this theory of antimatter, And what it essentially turns out to be on a scientific level is that they try to talk about for everything that exists, and, existence in the universe is a very relative thing. We're able to sense that matter or mass or energy exists, and what they try to do is say, okay, well, the inverse of that mass, of that matter, of that energy, the thing that would cancel that out in charge, a positive to a negative or a negative to a positive, thus canceling out its existence, its signature in our universe, is typically always earmarked as antimatter. But what I'm going to get into with the CERN episode is that this claim, all right, that once you bring antimatter into this universe, it is chaos. It is this almost if you will, a gas of atomic forces that infect all sentient life. And because it undoes the order in the brain of a human being, in the soul mortal coil relationship, let's say, that we lose our grip on reality. We lose all of our faculties that keep us sane. Meaning, if you wake up in the morning and you have any positive thoughts about your day, you no longer can make those positive thoughts because this chaotic energy is confusing your mind, right? It's like someone jumbling up your brain. And it's like when people get on psychotropic drugs. Anytime you get on a drug that's replacing what your body typically makes, once you get off the drug, your body's not making it anymore because it's like, hey, you were supplying this via a pill or an injection, and so we won't make it anymore. And so when you come off of an antidepressant, you get massively depressed. I've had two buddies in high school, within, I think, 2 months of each other, go in their basements and blow their brains out with their families upstairs eating dinner. They link these artificial patsies to these horrible events around the world that take away our gun rights or try to sway the opinion to get rid of guns. They find a kid through a search in the surveillance software and find a kid who's got the profile that'll match all this stuff, plus he's on psychotropic drugs, plus he's a gun owner, plus he's living in a red state. Plus he's young enough to be isolated for that short period in his life where he's left the house but hasn't quite found a wife yet. And he's in that awkward stage where we can watch where his credit card goes. He goes to titty bars, and essentially we can watch him in his home through the surveillance of every other human being in their life. We know that they're alone because everyone brings a cell phone with them, so you can just simply look at the cell phone signatures in their houses and find out they're an absolute candidate to blame anything on. And then they create this horrific event, blame the kid. Everyone finds a psychotropic drug connection, and he goes, looky there. It's all about psychotropic drugs creating these crazies. And in some cases, I'm sure it's true. But I think when it really, really matters, the bigger the crisis, the more it's fake and the more it's orchestrated. So the demonic, the realm, as they try to put it, right? This realm of other beings that are of evil intent sort of falls apart for me in the sense that I don't know how they would exist in their own realm if that was the standard by which they live their lives. Because I think they would, one, consume each other, be like a bunch of psychotic Klingons who are all crazy, killing machines trying to live with each other. Why would they have patience for each other? How could they ever procreate? How could their population ever go up if all they're doing is undoing reality? And some of you might say, well, look, they're the same polarity of evil, so that they don't have that capability of hurting each other. They just want to hurt us. Well, you would have to have some sort of Monsters, Inc. ecosystem where they would literally feed on our fears, But let's take fear for its biological signature in the human being. If you're peaceful sitting on your sofa, watching your favorite show, sipping your favorite drink, you're about to relax in bed, or you're in bed, maybe even listening to the show, and you're totally at peace with yourself, you are in a low frequency, long wave existence. As you go deeper and deeper through the twilight zone of sleep and you hit your delta phase of sleep, you cut out that major snore that's going on, you are in a low frequency of energy. Now, what if you were to create a being, or there is a being in the universe that survives on the super duper invigorated frequencies? You know that once there's a sound in the middle of the night where you fear for your life, or you're in a social situation where all of a sudden you fear for your life, the hairs on the back of your neck go up, your energy level spikes, your frequency of thought spikes, and you go into fight or flight. All the genetics of survival start to fire off. And all of a sudden, you're putting out this massive frequency of fear. Like the children that are tortured by these psychotic people, you're one of them. And maybe, on the realm that isn't blood, maybe the realm of your sheer electrical signal, you're putting out something that nourishes another being. And so, if they, the being, whether it be a benign interdimensional creature, what if they fed on that? What if they fed on the chaos of man? Man just happens to be one species that does it. Maybe they feed off animals more often because animals seem to be freaked out 24/7, right? Go see a deer in the wilderness and make a noise and watch how that thing takes a look around and books out of dodge, right? But maybe the complexity and the efficiency and the deliciousness of our fear is way more intense. And I've always pointed you guys to the movie Branded. If you haven't seen it, go see it. I think it's free on Netflix, but if you have to rent it, rent it. You find it in the bargain bin, buy it. Branded is an indie film made out of Russia with some pretty good actors from the States. And it's about an alien race that feeds off of the lust of man for brands, the lust of man for anything. And all it does is it survives on the lust you have to get an object. And the second you have the object, it no longer is interested in you because you're satiated. You go into low frequency satiation and elation. But that fear that you're not going to get the object creates this other form of thought that they thrive on. And they did a brilliant job. The movie's a little awkward. It's a little slow at times, but man, by the time you get to the end, I think the payoff's pretty amazing. What's weird about the universe? I shouldn't say the universe. What's weird about planet Earth is this notion, and I think George Lucas just came out and was frustrated during this interview. And his statement was, why don't we want to make the world a better place? Why don't we want to make, instead of the survival of the fittest, why don't we want everyone to eat? Why don't we want everyone to be happy? Why don't we want to see what inventions every culture can come up with if well-fed and well-nourished, well-educated, nourished with information, nourished with nutrition? And we know that there are a bunch of overlays on the reason why that doesn't happen. Some of them are primitive, that racism alone freaks people out, you know. There's a lot of white people in power structures that fear African people. Take your scrawny banker and strip him down, put him in a Speedo, and put him right next to your average healthy African male. And put him in a Speedo. And look at the two bodies standing next to each other. One is a formidable jungle survivalist who is in complete balance with nature, hunts for his food every single day, doesn't have as much education, I would say, scientifically or culturally, as the guy to his side, who's the banker. But in the end, the physical, formidable nature of a very well-fit genetic species is going to terrify the living crap out of your more pasty white guy, you know? So you can understand why your pasty white guy is like, man, we can't let those folks get any power. We can't let Africa amass an army, for God's sakes, because if they ever wanted to just simply come up and take over Europe physically, if it was just down to conventional means, especially if they got nuclear weapons or some other means to, you know, shock us and then march up with their soldiers, it'd be a hell of a battle, you know? They don't want that physical threat, which is why I believe I was told a long time ago that there isn't a single nuclear reactor in the entire continent of Africa. Not one. But all your uranium's in Africa. It's really funny. Or most of it is, right? So that's one overlay. But the other overlay, as we always put on this show, is the control apparatus. Keeping people down is keeping them under control. But it just seems that there would be a way to keep people pretty docile and pretty incapable of taking over the world without making their lives miserable. That seems to be what the standard is, right? And miserable is obviously relative, right? There's people in the slumlords of India who have no idea they're living in the slumlords. There's people in South America that have to, you know, throw their stool out their front windows because there's no plumbing. And they don't know any difference, so they don't really know that it's a bad thing. Maybe if they pollute their water supply and get the plague and everyone starts dying, they'll start understanding what the dangers of that is. But as long as that doesn't occur and their immune systems are really high to fight all the natural infections that are down their area, well, they're not going to notice, you know. The other overlay is necessity. As I've said a couple times on different episodes, my friends who grew up in the 60s and lived in communes, they all lament to me over and over and over again that the communes didn't work. That only 3% of the 100% of people in the communes, no matter how they started, worked. And the other 97% didn't do anything. And they all fell apart because the 97% were absolutely lazy bastards. All right, well, what if somebody knows that at a nation level, that if you supply too much, that no one works anymore? And again, evil starts taking on a really strange relative perspective. And outside of this true invasion from the game Doom, right, and Quake, where demons are penetrating this reality and taking over and fighting Marines and that kind of thing, without that, right, you don't really have the chaos that they're talking about. So in terms of demons, if I have very little evidence about ghosts, I have absolutely no evidence about demons whatsoever. Now, I'm going to throw you a fairly esoteric one that I think most male human beings are very aware of if you've hit 20. And that is that, and there's been a lot of jokes about this in movies like Something About Mary, which is, this is going to be a little graphic for just a second, but I'll try to use friendly words. There's the old theory that if you're about to go out on a hot date and you don't want to lose control of yourself and say stupid things and you want to be relaxed during your date, the men are told to pleasure themselves before the date, right? And I'll just let you fill in the blanks there, right? It was one of the huge twists, funny turns in the movie Something About Mary, where I think it was Chris Elliott's character was telling Ben Stiller, you can't go out there with your baby batter on board. You got to get rid of the baby batter, and then you're going to be ready for this drop-dead gorgeous girlfriend you have. And he, of course, in the movie, he does it in the bathroom, and he orgasms, and he can't find any of his batter. And he's like, where the hell did it go? And he couldn't find it. And so then he ends up going on the date, not finding out where the stuff went. And it was in his hair or something like that, or it was on his ear. I don't know what it was. And the girlfriend, pulls it off of his ear, I think, and says, oh, is this hair gel? Oh, great, I need some. And she pushes in her hair, and the audience laughs for probably 60 seconds straight. And I have to say, if there's any dialogue in a movie that has never been heard by mankind, it's the 60 seconds after she put the stuff in her hair, because the audience, or the bed or the room that you're listening to this to, is laughing so hard that no one knows what they're saying. And I guarantee you the writers knew that was going to occur and wrote nothing in that spot. It was just probably bullshit. I can't remember what she said, because I was laughing so damn hard that I couldn't hear a thing, and beautifully written, right? Consequently, that movie was ripped off from a buddy of mine. But any guy, I could say, who's felt the utter push of his loins in a physical, sexual manner, understands that the second that they, and there's a million jokes about this, right? That once a man climaxes, and this happens to females too, but because men are wired differently than females, we feel it, I think, a lot more often than females, that once you do climax, the desires and irrational thoughts you had maybe towards loving the person sinks in. And you regret sometimes what you did. If nothing else, you're just like, God, I should have had more control. There's a lot of babies in this world, probably thankfully for some of us, that are a result of these irrational moments, right? And there's a lot of Eastern religions that liken that whole thing to the demon possession that happens when I think that if there's anything that can be proven by a bag of chemicals, it's just the overwhelming desire to procreate. And depending on where you are in life, we're supposed to be children forever in this world, right? We're not supposed to procreate when we can, If you're, I'm just going to speculate here, but I think if you're in your mid-20s and you're a guy and you haven't had any kids yet, biologically, you're way past your starting gate to actually make that happen. And so, of course, the force comes in on you really, really heavy to do that. And if you don't really have the act of procreation in mind, you don't have your spouse that you're going to do it with, you're just going to be irrationally trying to deal with this overwhelming chemical emotion in your body, right? So I think that's a place where people believe there's possessions. People who get addicted to things, gamblings and drugs and alcohol, you believe that that's sort of a satiating, you're satiating your desires there. But anyone who's gone to Vegas owning a house and who comes home losing the mortgage of their house, losing their marriage, they might say, look, I know what it was like to be possessed by a devil. I think it was either Nipsey Russell or Red Fox who had that bit about the devil made me buy this dress, and they were acting in drag, acting like they were females. And they had this bit, and it was a stand-up comedy bit where they said, the devil made me buy this dress, and they were imitating some female that they knew. And it's really just likening to the lust, which is addressed in the movie Branded, And I think that we've all felt that. And so some people like to isolate that feeling, that lustful feeling, as saying that's where the devils or the demons of the universe come in to push us in a particular direction. And again, I think if Kurzweil ever wanted to explain something that's paranormal, he could go after that and nail it. It's a chemical addiction to a potential reality. In gambling, it's always the next thing that you do could give you so much money in the world that you never have to work again. For some people that are very competitive, just winning, just the feeling of winning, satiates a feeling of being a loser. I don't find people addicted to competitive natures who are truly satiated with feeling like they are true successful people in the world. The people that I know that are addicted to alcohol actually have fairly depressing lives. But if you ask them, they might say, oh, I love my life. I totally love my life. Gulp, 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 gulp. They don't. Or maybe for a long stretch of their life, they didn't. They got addicted to whatever they're addicted to, and now their life is actually technically okay, but they're unable to recognize it because they're so delusional on the drug that they're addicted to, So the demonic possession thing, I think, is... for me, it is as loose gets when it comes to humanity and being a real thing that we need to be concerned about. I think that I think I've dealt with this in my own life too, where you do identify an addiction, however subtle it might be. It could be playing video games, watching TV, whatever it is. It's sort of an anti-productive thing. And if you really get obsessed with being productive, you sort of shortchange your need to be happy. And you don't take care of self, which is happiness. And you tend to feel guilty if you take any time off to be happy. And of course, the choices, as you become more mature with life, shrink drastically. I find this interesting cycle with life. This is going to be a slightly related topic, but the cycles I see with life is that when we're young, we're massively indoctrinated. Between 1 and 10, we believe in magic. Between 11 and 20, we're really looking for the rite of passage that usually never shows up. Between 20 and 30, depending on what generation you are, you're trying to get your chops in life because you have to start paying your own bills. Between 30 and 40, you are determining whether or not you're ever going to settle down in life. Or you're going to ever get married, or you're going to ever have your kids. And some of you start that in your 20s, which is great. In 40, you become sort of your first level of cynical person. Cynicism starts to set in, and you start to become more discerning than ever before. You realize what you like and what you don't like. So what you're able to do to be entertained shrinks drastically. This carries into at least your 50s. In your 60s, in this country, because you're told we're going to die anytime, you're glad to be alive. And it starts to be every day is a joyous day, depending on how you wake up. And it's usually probably your late 60s you start running into this. But your discernment starts to erode because your peripheral vision of satisfaction and what you can get into to make yourself happy starts to widen drastically. And, in your 70s, it just depends. Some people get more cynical as time goes on. There's the no country from old men formula where all the kids are ridiculous and you're the only smart one on planet Earth and all the culture sucks and yada yada. Hey, culture's going to change no matter what you do, I think that as we do become more aware of what it requires to run a country and keep it free, we see the elite of the world, or the ruling class of the world, exploit this ignorance of children which sadly are over 60 half the time, to get them to knee-jerk into agendas, which give them more power, like taking away guns, like taking away freedoms, right? More checkpoints, more draconian control, under the guise of the dagger of goodwill that you're going to benefit from this, but they've already rigged the game every single time they do it, right? Income tax was rigged to make sure the rich never pay, and that's why the 1% exists. But the same government body that gave us that control apparatus is being fueled more and more and more by these same social programs and political parties that are exactly the same on both sides of the fence, right? I think what's sad about the demonic subject matter is that it's always linked back to the Bible. And the Bible becomes this schematic for how to live your life and avoid evil. And, there are great things in the Bible to get you to understand patience. And I'm sure there's in the Quran and the Torah and all these other religions as well. Most religions are trying to promote peace at their core, whether or not they succeed or not, whether the means of which they're teaching it is ridiculous, whether or not they demonize God to be this child who kills children, this wrathful consciousness in space, which is absurd. But the thing is once you fuel this any type of radical religion, and it's what's funny about it is that Christians don't think they're a radical religion, and they completely are, right? It fuels more and more control for the future. So, but what ends up fueling this, with the CERN thing especially, is, the people who are in charge tend to propagate this Satanistic thing. And Satanism is the opposite of Christianity, right? And so, more Satanistic stuff that's put out there. It's almost like a huge psyop to keep the religious people of the world fueled, which keeps divide fueled, which keeps chaos fueled. And it's in the end result. What is supposed to give us order drives our chaos. What's supposed to drive peace gives us war. And so the whole thing is this ancestral loop of almost laughable connections, right? The CERN logo is 3 6s put together. There's no way around it, man. The Lucifer horse that's outside of the Denver airport is the most satanic thing you've ever seen in your fucking life. The murals inside the Denver airport is a prophecy in painting. Now, I'm not saying prophecy is going to happen, but this kind of willed evil prophecy of global suffering and then unification under this little blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid in lederhosen, right? Whitey's always on top, people. 'Cause that's the way God wants it, right? Aryan people are the ones that are supposed to run the world, right? Mm-hmm. Anything to distract us from who's really doing the deeds. I would say studying Satanism and demonic theology will definitely help you understand the way that these people think, unfortunately. And maybe that's what we have to do to understand how to stop it, how to catch it, how to find it. But it's most likely a fictional apparatus. Are there always things that are negative and against us? Absolutely. You can call them demons if you want. You can call the humans that do it demons. Whatever. They definitely don't deserve a positive name, right? So this is going to be our first late night episode. I probably won't do a hell of a lot of these things, but it's the day before we all go back to work. It's the 3rd of January, so whenever this comes out, you'll see how far away I was ahead of things to get this out the door. We're paying attention because it exists. We're paying attention because we want the world to be a better place. Again, we want the order that we can wake up in an orderly world that preserves our rights, that preserves our destiny, that preserves whatever destiny we actually can achieve with whatever faculties we have physically and mentally, environmentally, right? And I think that we, through distractions, through sports and reality shows and celebrity worship and paradigm worshiping, like left and right paradigms of political apparatus, the conservatives against the liberals in Europe, we are so utterly and completely distracted from what might be a peaceful planet. that it's good to take these little digressions into what might actually be considered evil. You know, I always try to toy with you guys and say, what if you ran the world? What would you do to make the world a better place? And what it really ends up being in the end is we would have to put words around behaviors in order to forbid them from occurring. Holocaust is a really big word in the world that we demonize, rightfully so. And that's an example where man put a word around an activity in the world, in world history. Whether the numbers and the deeds are exactly as they've been recorded in history, it is really irrelevant. Something horrific did happen in World War II. So we put words around it. But that's a big thing that we were able to push into the consciousness of man. Because man, as much as it was horrific, we were willing to look at the data and we're willing to believe it. Whether or not it's true or not, right? So how do we wrap our mind around having a conversation about child sacrifices? How do we have that conversation? It's a very, very tough conversation to have. If you think it's tough telling someone about 9/11, then try to tell them about the moon missions. You'll find more resistance against the moon missions being fake than 9/11 being fake. If you think that it's hard to get people to believe that the moon missions were fake, which you can easily scientifically prove, try to talk to them about child sacrifices. You know? And isn't it really bizarre that that's one of the capital sins that's happening in this world? And because it's so horrific, just like David Rockefeller said in his speech to the press, I think in the late 70s, he said, you know, you guys have been very instrumental in helping us gain the upper control of this world. And he goes, the thing that's made this possible outside of you is that the more horrific that we do things, the less people are willing to study the data to catch us. So we get to do whatever we want to do, as long as we keep what we do so evil that man can't contemplate it, won't contemplate it, because they can't be put out of their local NFL game, their local FIFA game. They don't want to wake up the next day with accountability, as I always say, and need to change the world because it is screwed up. You know, it's one of these things that I try to give you this analogy you can pass on to your friends, which is for anybody who's trying to poo-poo the GMOs of the world, the poisons of the world. You say, look, what if I gave you a glass of Drano? Would you drink it? Well, hell no. Well, why not? Because it'll kill me. Okay. So again, if I mix it down and it kills you in 20 years, but it tastes delicious, will you drink it? Well, maybe. Actually, they won't. They're like, no, because it'll kill me. Okay, so if the FDA tells you that this stuff is good, will you do it? Well, if the FDA looks at it, well, then I guess so. So kill them in 20 years. So if I said, okay, what if there's this random faction that's going to knock on your door and grab your firstborn, your secondborn, or all your kids and take them off to be sacrificed? Would you let them come in? Well, of course not. That's a ridiculous question. Okay. What if they exist in your neighborhood at the local satanic church that you don't know exists, or they're just in their living rooms worshiping this stuff, and their mantra of existence is death, chaos, to take their senseless, worthless lives that have no internal value whatsoever, and they usurp these ancient rituals, and they come after you. Are you going to wait till they get the upper hand? Seems like that's what we've already done, right? They haven't got the upper hand. The big illusion that's going on right now is that the world elite actually have control over us. They absolutely, positively don't. Remember what they call the 1%. They call it the 1%. And we know the people that run the world is a fraction of a percent of the 1%. Okay? The ultra quadrillionaires, right? Well, that doesn't sound like there are very many people at the very, very top of this pyramid. Doesn't sound like we have much work to do to get rid of them. Doesn't sound like it, does it? Very few people would have to act up. And some people know where these people are, and they look the other way, hoping that the next shift, the next generation can deal with it. And the only problem is that the next generation has been so intentionally dumbed down that I think they're going to get their way for a very long time, unless this consciousness that we're all sharing right now on shows like this and other shows dominates. If we don't take time out of our day to ease this information into people's minds again, the subjects of child sacrifice and stuff and child abduction, man, that's level 10, and most people are having a problem with level 1. So I don't know how to do it. I know how to get this stuff into people's minds. I think that knowledge does spread, though. I think that if your brain knows this information and you think about it in details and you research it and you cut away all the fat of the bullshit, and I'm sure I'm repeating stuff that's not true, but I just got to tell you what I've heard, from people that have infiltrated these groups and said, man, I had to sip from this goblet of blood, and I'll never forget it. It's a horrible situation, but if I didn't sip from it, they would have killed me, and it's better that I get out with that information, sip it and get out and tell people about this than it is for me to get killed in the eyes wide shut party, right? Ghosts and demons. Things that are unknown and we are afraid of. Ghosts may be benign. Ghosts may be evil. Ghosts may be very localized personal vendettas against a house or a person or a place. But it seems like there's plenty of genetic defects in the consciousness of man to create our own demons here on Earth before we have to talk about CERN bringing them in from another universe. We're going to get into that in a whole separate episode. But I got to get my notes in place because I don't want to leave out anything from that coverage, and I know I'm going to. So just know it's going to be recorded and it's coming. It's going to rain here for a week, and so I'm not going to be able to get out and do any shows at all. Luckily, I got plenty in the queue. But this Lucifer is dead now, because I beat it up so much. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening, as always. MKUltraRadio.com. MKUltraRadio.com, to pronounce that properly, to go to get all the feeds. Hope you enjoy the show. I want to thank everybody for subscribing. Hope you're digging all this. Please keep your ideas coming. We've nearly doubled our subscription rate recently, and I couldn't feel more privileged to be at the tip of the spear on this one. Again, this is not about me at all. There's no ego in here at all. I'm struggling to keep up with you guys and your incredible contributions to the show and your speculation on things. And again, we welcome dissent because we don't have all the answers and we're not all right. I'm really just trying to be a gateway to this information, an aggregator, if you will, of all these crazy theories, and try to add, perhaps a constructive opinion on how to view the information, and then perhaps some techniques on how to spread it. So that's it. So I bid you a good night, and I will see you in the next episode. Over now.